Welcome back to Technique WOD. I'm Doug Larson with the Barbell Shrugged podcast. This is video number 5 in the squat series, and we're talking about box squats. All right, so if you haven't been watching the rest of the squat series, video number 1 was the overview video. We actually talked a little bit about box squats in that very first video, because that's a very easy way to learn how to squat, is starting off of a box. So we're going to touch on it again today. As I said, video number 2 was front squats. Video number 3 was back squats, and then video number 4 last week was on spotting all different types of squats, front squats, back squats, and then again on box squats, and we'll touch on that again today as well. First, a lot of CrossFitters don't tend to do a lot of box squats, even though powerlifting has really kind of moved into the CrossFit community. Still, it's one of the squats that gets used the least, in part because you just don't put box squats in a Metcon or in a WOD for the most part. You use it for your strength work, which is fantastic, but it's not really in a lot of Metcons, so usually new athletes don't get introduced to box squats until they've been doing CrossFit for quite some time, and then they might get it as part of their strength program once they get a little bit more experience. So for me, the reason I like box squats is it's one more variation of squatting that you can do. Typically weightlifting style squatting, front squats, overhead squats, high bar Olympic style back squats. You tend to be very vertical with your torso, and it tends to be a very knee dominant style of squatting. Granted, you're still using your hips and all your leg muscles, and all those muscles are being used, so it's not like you're not using your hips, but low bar back squats, powerlifting style box squats, and just powerlifting style squats in general, low bar, wide stance, etc., they tend to be more of a hip dominant style squat, a glute dominant style squat. So today, if you haven't done a lot of box squatting before, it's a variation that you might want to pay attention to and that you might want to incorporate into your training down the line, because it'll help balance out the type of squatting that you're used to if you have always been doing more Olympic style squatting. This is a good variation to add to your programming. So if you haven't seen box squatting before, a lot of different variations that you could use. For the most part, you're just going to set up with a slightly wider stance than you normally would. If I do, front squats right here, box squats, I tend to go a little bit wider. I like that because sitting down onto a box with a very narrow stance, you'll tend to kind of drop straight down, and that's not very good box squat technique, even though in weightlifting you might do that sometimes. So generally I go a little bit wider, and then if you go a little wider, I tend to toe out just a little bit more. I'd find that if I go toes straight ahead with a super wide stance, then my femur's going that way and my toes are going this way, and that twists my knee too far the opposite way. Usually people toe out like this and their knee goes in and you twist your knee to the outside, but I find if I go toes straight ahead with a super wide stance, when I push my knees out, now my knee's being twisted the opposite way. You can get problems both ways, even though knees diving in with toes pointed out is more common. So a wider stance is okay. Knees wide over toes, like we always do. From the side, I'm going to want to land with a vertical shin, obviously a tight back, heels on the ground. What do people do wrong oftentimes with box squats is that, again, they stand too close together, and then they go straight down, and then they end up with this very forward shin angle. Okay? It's not the end of the world, but with box squatting, for the most part, you want to land with a vertical shin. So the reason I like box squatting with new people is you can have them just sit down on a box, tell them to sit up nice and tall, and you can physically grab their leg and move their foot where you want it, put their toes whatever direction you want them, and then you can say, okay, this is your perfect stance. They know exactly where to put their feet, they know exactly what position they need to be in, and then they can learn the movement from the bottom up. Okay? Now I don't have to figure out where to put my feet. I already know that when I sit back down, butt back, vertical shin, that I'm going to land in a good spot because I set up from the bottom at the start. So that's one of the reasons I like box squats, is because it's so much easier to teach new people how to get into a good position at the bottom of the movement. Okay?
Drake loves those squats.
Who?
Drake.
Drake.
Rapper.
Rappers love squats. Everybody knows that. So if you watch the overview video, you'll remember that the 3 big things that I always touch on with squatting is neutral spine, heels down, knees out over your feet. So you never want to round your back, you never want to be on your toes, you never want your knees to dive towards each other. Those are the 3 big things that I constantly focus on. With box squatting, I usually add a 4th thing, and that's vertical shin. Granted, on regular squatting, you want to have a vertical shin as much as possible, but if you're doing Olympic style squatting, Again, overhead squats, front squats, and high bar back squats. Unless you have very good weightlifting leverage, you're probably not going to really have a vertical shin, especially at the very bottom of the movement. But with box squatting, you're going to. Okay? So we have a couple options as far as what you can actually squat down to and sit down onto. You can see here I have, this is actually made for box squatting, and it's adjustable. But usually what we do is just leave it on the lowest setting, and then if we want to raise it up, we usually just put a plate down. A heavy 25-kilo plate isn't going to slide around, so we use that. Or if you have this is a 12-inch box, and then we have mats. These are nice, nice light foam mats that are easy to slip on and slip off, especially if you have a bunch of people that are squatting in a flight like you would in powerlifting. It's easy to have one person here and then just take off two, and then when that person comes back, you can just slide them back on, and you can change the height very quickly and very easily. Another benefit of having the mats is that if I squat 5 sets of 5, and I'm at this height 1 week, then the next week I can keep the same weight, and then as a part of my progression, I can just slide a mat off, and then the next week I can just squat a little lower, and then the next week I can just slide another mat off, and I can squat a little lower, and it's one more way to have a progression where you're having a training variable adjusted, but it's not necessarily just adding 5 pounds every week. You're starting with a lot of weight at a higher box squat height, and that's going to allow you normally to do a little more weight, and then you can slowly get lower and lower over time. So each successive week gets a little bit more difficult, and then you have that built-in progression. Okay. The other thing that I like to do with box squats, is use a safety bar. I'm going to borrow Chris Moore for the safety bar session.
Well.
Your time has come.
Have I been on Technique Lab before?
I don't know, has he? I think so.
It's been a long time, man. I can hardly remember.
Didn't you do a technique WOD on chains and bands or good mornings in your garage one time?
I guess I did. It's been like about a year.
You don't remember.
I don't remember. Cool story, bros.
Yeah, right.
Edit that shit out.
Okay, so Chris is going to use the safety bar. Go ahead and step in there. Sometimes we'll use the bench. Here's the third option that I was going to talk about. If you just want to have a set height, using a bench is just fine, but it's harder to add something like a weight plate or these bigger mats to adjust the height of a bench. You can put the plates underneath it if you wanted to. We've done that before, but for the most part, I don't really adjust the height of the bench very often. I usually do that with the boxes. But if you look at Chris from the side, I'll go ahead and unrack the bar. So he's using a safety bar. You can use whatever specialty bars you want. Box squatting with a safety bar or a giant camera bar is super common. But you can see Chris is very tall here. He's going to brace his core, get nice and tight, and then his hips are going to go back. He's going to try and keep that vertical shin as best he can. He's going to sit all the way down. Usually we like to rock back. Okay, he gets all the way back to a vertical torso. He's basically just sitting there. He's still tight here, but he's rocked all the way back, and he is sitting all the way down. Then he's going to rock forward at the hips, keeping that tight back, and he's going to push the floor apart, activating his glutes right off of the bench. A common thing to happen is that guys they push with their quads right off the bench, and they don't really try and squeeze their butt and squeeze their glutes right off the bench. So he wants to fire his glutes right off the bench. And the benefit of sitting all the way down is that you're killing all of your momentum and you're killing the bounce. A lot of guys like to bounce out of the hole. Well, with a box squat, it's kind of nice to be able to go down, sit all the way down. All that stretch shortening cycle plyometric effect is eliminated, and you don't get that soft tissue bounce where your tendons stretch and then contract. Okay? You're killing all that momentum, and then you have to use pure raw strength off of the bench, and that's just one more way to help yourself get a little bit stronger. All right, we're back. I'm going to do some demos. Chris had something else to do.
So sad. All right, we gotta get out of here, man. Sorry. Shit. Okay, you gonna live? You gonna survive this turmoil? Yeah. This strife? It's hot and you're tired, and you got show love your face, and you're really sad. Oh man.
All right, a few errors. Number one, you always want to butt back, knees out, and then sit nice and soft down on the bench. You obviously never want to just go down and just like crash down on the bench. If this is really heavy, this is a very hard stop, and you're going to fold, and it's going to fucking break your back. So you don't want to do that. So, maybe a 2 or 3 count on the way down, sit down real nice, and then on the way up, you want to lean forward a tiny bit just to get the weight back over your heels, but you don't ever want to try and get momentum and like rock out of the hole, especially with a safety bar. It's high. This is sticking forward, and the weight is in front. It's going to make it want to roll, okay? This wants to be vertical, right? That wants to be like that. And so it's going to, as I go forward, it's going to want to keep rolling forward. And I've had it before where I've gone like this, and then it's like, and it just tips you forward. So if you have a spotter, not the end of the world, but that's just bad technique no matter what. So you're going to lean forward and then try and come straight up. So I'm here, lean forward a little bit, and then my hips come forward right off the box. Try and keep that vertical shin the whole time. Right to here. At the top, I'm squeezing my glutes together. I don't end hyperextended like this. On my way up, I'm squeezing my glutes, and I'm pulling my hips all the way through at the top. So my ribs are down, my butt is squeezed, I have a neutral spine, and I'm not broken like this, okay? That means also if I start like this, then I don't break before I go down. I just bend forward a little bit with that neutral spine without hyperextending and getting that little bit of a tilt with my pelvis, okay? So I'm here, knees out, butt back, ribs stay down, butt's still trying to squeeze. Sit down real nice, rock forward, come up, squeeze your glutes to the top. So box squats are also fantastic for people that don't have very good squatting leverage. If you have a short torso, long femurs, long limbs in general, that's not good squatting leverage. So box squats are going to make it easier for you to do a full depth squat, squatting down to whatever you choose. And it's going to be much easier for you to box squat if you are a very tall athlete or an athlete that just is very lanky if you're doing box squats instead. And I kind of don't have very good squatting leverage, so if I have a little bit of a wider stance, if I have super long legs, I can get into this position just fine, and it might be really hard for me to sit all the way down like this if I don't have very good squatting leverage, unless I'm already very mobile. So that's another population of people that is going to it's going to be easier on your body and on your joints to do box squats is if you aren't very mobile already, especially if you have very poor ankle mobility. If you look at me with a vertical shin, my ankle in this case is barely bent at all, okay? Whereas if I hop over again, if I'm at the bottom of an overhead squat or something like that, I got this forward shin angle and my ankle is bent. So if I don't have very good ankle mobility, if I don't have very good hip mobility, then it's going to be easier for me to box squat. And then slowly over time, as I get more mobility, again, I can move a mat away and I can slowly ratchet myself down, and maybe I can eventually go back to full depth front squats, back squats, or overhead squats. So it can save your joints over time if you're not very mobile. Also, if you have any injuries, then it really can help you out, especially knee injuries, even back injuries to some extent. Some people don't like box squats because they think it's hard on your back. If you're doing it correctly, then it shouldn't be. If you're sitting down nice and soft, if you're staying tight, if you have a neutral spine and you're not round, then it can be just fine on your back. And what it does is it keeps you from going too low. So if I'm a person that doesn't have very good hip mobility and I go down to here and I know that at this height, I got this box with 4 pads, or 4 mats rather, and I know I can keep my back tight there, then I'm not at risk of getting tired, getting past that depth, and then rounding and re-injuring myself, okay? Same thing with knee trouble. If I'm a person that I've been doing a lot of heavy cleans and front squats and I like to bounce out of the hole, and for some reason my knees are starting to get achy. Your knees can easily get achy if you're kind of always bouncing out of this position, okay? A lot of volume in that position, even with good technique, it's gonna cause for achy knees eventually. Even weightlifters that are, their technique is spot on and they compete all the time and they're really good at it. Still, it's a lot of wear and tear on your joints, and getting that bounce out of the hole can be hard on your joints. But with a box squat, even if you're front squatting here, I can still get into this position where my knees, again, they're not all the way in full flexion. I have a more vertical shin here than I would otherwise. And then I can just come out of the hole there. And again, if I want to go wider, I can. It's not something people do a whole lot of, but there's no reason you can't do it. So just a couple of other variations you can put into your training. So in my mind, box squats are a very safe way to squat, and there's a lot of good reasons to do them. So no squat's necessarily better than any other squat. It all just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And if you know why you're doing it, then there's nothing wrong with doing box squats, even as a replacement for high bar, full depth Olympic back squats, if you're a person that has those injuries or a lack of mobility, or you're just not really built to squat in general. So if you have any specific questions about that, you can always send us an email or just go to barbellshrugged.com, and there's an Ask a Question tab at the top of the page. And then we also do live Q&As on occasion. You might be able to get in on one of those. So if you want to see more of the squat series, we're going to add, I'll probably do overhead squats next. And you can always go to barbellshrugged.com, click the episodes tab at the top of the page, click on Technique WOD, and all of our videos will be in the library. I'll see you another day.
All your dreams will come true.
That's all right.